Do you happen to have siblings? And if you do, if I were to ask you and your siblings about your childhood, would you guys have the same story or very different stories? So that's what we're talking about today, stories and the power of being an adult. So, a core need as a child is to be safe, to feel loved, and to belong. And it's basically our parents' jobs to meet those needs as best that they can. The challenge is things get in the way of that. We have traumas, and it could be big T traumas, some big events, or small T traumas where they're just repeated events of neglect that can very much change our brains and change the way we function. But it goes even beyond that. We can have seemingly things that to one sibling might have been very minor, and to another sibling, they made a story about it that just got infused in their life and then now is affecting how they live their life. I've done it, you do it, we all do it. And it's just so interesting to be aware of how this is working and how this is happening. And basically, we just get wired. And so it's very interesting. For example, my husband grew up in an environment where it was like walking on eggshells. And they just had to be very aware of the dominant person in the house. And all of them are high strung. And you can say, well, is that nature? Is it nurture? It's very interesting how they're all very just higher strung. And I can definitely tell, even from my experience in my 22-year previous marriage, it took me a long time to rewire the tenseness that I felt at all times from also feeling like I was walking on eggshells. So it's interesting how these patterns get wired into our brains. But as adults, we can change and we have the power to. So let's talk about some examples of how these stories and how these circumstances play out. One thing I want to distinguish, we have circumstances. That's just if I were to be a very bland tax attorney or a very bland accountant, just the facts of things that happened. But that actually isn't what affects our feelings and our actions and our results. It's actually how we interpret that and the stories we tell ourselves. And then it's the repeat of those stories that create beliefs. And that is how we live. And so it's very, that's why we can be with like I have 3 other siblings. That's why, we each interpreted our childhood very differently and have different ramifications from it. And I'll get into the details of that too, because it is kind of interesting. So let's give some other examples. It could be where possibly the parents fight violently and the child adopts an idea that it's not safe to be in a relationship. And they find out as an adult that they're constantly, when they get too close to someone, they start to push them away, but they don't know why. And it's this subconscious story that relationships are not safe, that they adopted from their childhood. So that's very interesting. Another example is maybe somebody was bullied in junior high or experienced some bullying. And they could have adopted a belief from that circumstance that in order to survive, they needed to be strong and powerful. And so every relationship they have to be the dominant one. Otherwise, they feel threatened and they feel vulnerable. And it comes from this belief that they've adopted when they didn't even know that they were adopting it. And then another example could be like something as simple as the parents are always rewarding them for good grades, but they didn't feel exactly loved. And so this actually identifies more with me, as I definitely got more attention upon achievement. And I think that's like a common parent thing that we do. But as a child, I think I adopted some of this. I'm not enough. I'm not enough on my own. I need to achieve in order to be enough. And then it was constantly a driving factor for me until I worked through that and know that I'm more than enough just because I'm a child of God like all of us. But I really had to change my belief and change my thinking. So it's just very interesting how that all happens. You have the circumstance, and then we've adopted a belief attached, or a thought attached to that circumstance, and we repeat that thought. Because once we repeat a thought, we have what we call in our brains our lifeguard and our lawyer. And so let's review that. So all of our brains have a lifeguard and a lawyer. We have a part of our brain, the lifeguard, that constantly wants to keep us safe, that constantly wants to keep us in the familiar, that's constantly reminding us of potential fear and danger and this and that, which is helpful in certain circumstances, but many times it gets overprotective and wants to keep us so safe that we're in a little kiddie pool with a life jacket and no water in the pool. So we just have to know there's a lifeguard in our brains that is constantly reminding us that we could be in danger and we need to be safe. Then we have the lawyer, which is super interesting because the lawyer it's not like a positive or negative lawyer. It's just you give it the information. You say, lawyer, I'm not safe in the world. And the lawyer does its job. It looks for evidence. It looks for past evidence. It looks for evidence going on right now. It's always looking for evidence. But the lawyer would do evidence if I said, I'm safe in the world. This is a great world. Then the lawyer goes to work and looks for evidence that way. And so you can see how easy it is for just a thought to become the lawyer finding more and more like, hey, there's more evidence, to becoming a belief. But that doesn't make it true. We basically are, tell ourselves lies and different things that could be really impacting us. So it's very interesting to see how that works. Unfortunately, as children, it makes it more challenging because they say up to about 7 years of age, a child, they don't have the adult brain. So a child, when they experience things, will always find a way to blame themselves. Even though they're not responsible for their parents fighting, they're not responsible for their parents' divorce, they're not responsible for maybe their parents working all the time and not being able to give them the attention that they felt like they wanted. They're not responsible, so it's just a child isn't responsible for any of that, and we all know that as adults, but the child brain in us, or our child brain, it didn't know that. So the child, how they adapted its beliefs and thinking was to always blame themselves and to take responsibility. And that's a great way to become a people pleaser. Because if you're constantly trying to appease a parent or being the solution person within your family system, that's wired in you. That's what you had to do to survive. And so being a people pleaser is what you do now because we're part of the pack. And that's another way, another example of being wired. So basically these ideas and beliefs, they will affect our relationships. They'll affect our, as we're trying to, especially if we're trying to strive for bigger and better things, that's when all these stories really come pounding down. If we're trying to evolve into having a healthier relationship with our spouse or trying to have healthier relationships with potential dating partners because we seem to choose kind of the same person that we don't want to choose anymore, all of those growth opportunities will bring in these stories, and that's these subconscious stories. Most of them are not in our awareness, but they're constantly being played out. Because the subconscious is 90% of what's driving us rather than our conscious mind. And that is why it's super, super important to kind of clean up our subconscious and understand it with compassion and really know what's going on there. So the good news is, woohoo, as adults, we can do the work. We can heal, we can create familiar, healthy patterns. It is in our power. It is in our ability to change. We can do it. And it looks differently for each of us as far as what we feel called to do, how we want to do that. First, we do have to decide that, hey, I can see that my, something is preventing me from getting to where I want to go. I'm having these patterns I don't like, and there's some work that needs to be done. And that's when we're like, okay, I need to probably work through this. And we're going to make that decision and pursue our health, and which is just amazing to me. So how do we do that? So we can do it by ourselves, and we can do there's a lot of books, podcasts, there's a lot of things we can do. That is why I wrote the Unravel notebook, which is 61 days prompts to help us to go deeper and help us to figure out some of those stories and help us reconnect with God, ourselves, others in an intentional manner to live brighter. So we can do it ourselves through lots of different resources. We can do it in community. So I have the Instagram community and my Facebook community, Live Brighter with Tara. Another option is counseling, and a counselor can specialize in EMDR, and that's what I use, if it's a trauma where you get that physical, emotional reaction when you think of it. EMDR is a great resource for that. A somatic therapist, so that's another counseling. A life coach, so again, the difference between a counselor and a life coach is, counselors are more if things are not functioning, they help with that. And a life coach believes that you're trying to get to this new area and you're having some limitations in that. And that's where we step in. But we really believe that you have all the answers within you. So it's more about creating an awareness of yourself and figuring out exactly how you want to move forward. I really think investing in ourselves is the biggest and best investment we can ever do. And I love, today I had a meeting with my kids and we're talking about investing and we're talking about different aspects and all of that, because I always try to train my kids in those areas. And I really believe the biggest investment we can do is in ourselves. And that's because like where I work for Keller Williams as a realtor as well. And the philosophy, which is so good, is be, do, have. If we want to have, we have to do the things to have it, but we also have to be the person to have it. So that being and creating the do and the have is really powerful. So I feel like we're put on earth to grow and not to be a product of our circumstances. And as I talked about before, a lot of our circumstances isn't about the circumstances, it's about our thoughts about them and the stories we've attached to that. So we get to choose. We are adults. We can be the products of growth and healing in our own lives. And I just think that makes God smile as he sees all of us just living up to our potential and living brightly. So grow 1% at a time. I believe in you. Have a great day. Are you a chronic people pleaser? Do you overgive, overfunction, pretty kind, and you're just tired, or maybe even a little bit resentful? Or are you wondering, like, wow, is this all too life? Is this how it works? Because I kind of feel like I'm going through the motions. Well, that's what the Unravel Notebook is for. It's 61 days to unravel our thinking, beliefs, and live a life intentionally as we connect closer with God, ourselves, and others, so we can be more confident and live brighter in this world. So why is it a good idea to overdrink? And why is it a good idea for us to become workaholics and possibly do drugs? Well, let's talk about that today. Let me tell you, it's because life is hard, because feelings is difficult, because healing from trauma can be challenging, and being honest with ourselves can suck. But the cost of that is so dramatic. If we continue to overdrink, become workaholics, do drug or overeat, or do all of those things to avoid our feelings and traumas, it costs us our spirit. Our spirit within us will shrivel and die, and we land in a place we don't want to be, where we're just going through the motions, numb, have addictions that end up hurting ourselves and others, and we'll likely have health issues that can destroy us. But we are too valuable for that. You're valuable, and the universe treasures you. So let's talk about alternatives. So let's just first talk about like how drinking, overworking, all of these different options can actually help us avoid feeling our feelings or dealing with our traumas. Drinking, for example, and I have nothing against drinking at all, just so you know, but drinking regularly can help us ignore things like, oh, I don't really like my job. I find it soul-sucking without purpose. Or drinking can help us avoid things that are true for us. For example, I don't really like this relationship. It's destroying me. Drinking can help us ignore the constant criticism and yelling we experience at home. Or it can help us soften the anger that we're feeling regularly, and the anger is trying to tell us something. It can suppress the rape maybe that we had it when we were 17. It can distract us from believing that we're lovable. I really like the example from Brooke Castillo. She is life coach, did the life coach school, talks a lot about wealth building, but she's one of the certifications I have in life coaching. And I like her story because first she stopped overeating and became very successful at that. And then she stopped over drinking and applied the same rules to that. But what she really learned through that is she was doing both of them to buffer herself from her feelings, because she didn't want to acknowledge realities in her life. She didn't want to be honest with herself. And I feel like we can all do that. So I really like her example. Overworking workaholism is actually kind of a really interesting one, because it gives you validation in society because it looks like you're hardworking, you're achieving, but overworking can actually be toxic and buffering and all of that as well. For example, maybe we're working because we don't want to go home because we don't feel validated there or appreciated, or maybe because it's just not a positive environment. So gosh, we can work, get money, get validation from others. I mean, win-win. Or maybe it helps us validate us because we grew up in an environment that caused us to believe that in order to be viewed as important, we had to work hard and be successful and stand out in order to be worthy. So we are workaholics in order to accomplish that and buffer from our real feelings of maybe unworthiness. And we all have our struggles. For example, this is when, and I'll talk about mine too, but this is when my husband can relate to, Mike, because he used to overwork and was more of a workaholic because he really didn't like his dynamic of his relationship and his marriage at the time. But that didn't solve anything. It just kind of buffered and allowed him to go through the motions. So for my choice, poison, which I just think is interesting, I would distract myself from my feelings and for dealing with my traumas by serving others. But it wasn't serving others is fabulous, but I was cooking for the homeless and mentally ill. I was visiting nursing home with my kids, and those are all fabulous, but I was doing it in such a way to be so busy that I didn't spend time to allow what my true thoughts and feelings that were lurking hidden in my basement. And so my choice poison was busyness. Because with all of these, I would say the one rule is don't be still, don't think, don't go deeper, because all of them are trying to push down the real thoughts and feelings and things that are really going on. So if you can like eliminate the stillness or eliminate that by drinking, overworking, or whatever we want to do, then we don't have to feel our feelings. We don't have to hear what it's telling us. The challenge with that is, it allowed me to be in a destructive relationship for a very long time. So even though I was like cutting off the pain of, distracting myself from serving others, it also, what it did is it chopped off the joy in my life as well. So I started getting very limited emotions and like couldn't even cry anymore. And basically I was just kind of going through the motions, but I wasn't living. And also it caused anxiety, which I stopped like sleeping, and that caused mental health challenges. So my choice poison works like all of them, not helpful in the end. But there's so many things that can keep buffering us or keep us from feeling our feelings or dealing with our traumas. It could be, like I said, drugs. It could be not just prescription drugs, but it could be, cocaine, meth, any of those things. It could be anorexia. It could be affairs. It could be overeating. We could be using whatever we want. It could be exercise. It could be supposedly good things like I was doing, like serving. But all of those, if it's keeping us from feeling our feelings and dealing with our injuries to our soul and spirit that we had when we were younger and haven't healed, it's not helping us. It's not helping us in the long run, and it'll have a cost. So be brave. Choose you. Don't let the support that we are using become our chains. So the one thing that I think all buffering is doing is basically soothing us and distracting us from hearing what our spirit, what our soul, what is going deeper. And the biggest thing we'll know is, can we be still? A big good test is like, can we be still? And when we're still, what comes up for us? Is it like super uncomfortable, the emotions, the feelings? Are we able to sit in with ourselves, to press into that stillness, to listen? And this was something I did not do at all and had to train myself to do because, again, I was avoiding what I probably at the time didn't want to hear. And that's the cool thing, is a lot of us aren't taught how to process and feel feelings and deal with traumas and stuff like that. So there's 4 steps to this. Step 1 is watch for avoidant patterns. Like drink now and then, overwork now and then, eat my puffed rice now and then. But if it becomes a pattern, the question is, it's like, what am I avoiding? So step 2 is be still and ask ourselves, what am I avoiding? Step 3 is feel the feelings. Like at that point, I was feeling lonely and missing him. And so I just sat with myself and just asked myself in my body, like, where are you feeling this? And it was around my heart, and like just looking at the color and looking at how it felt in my body. And the cool thing is when we do that, feelings actually dissipate. So if we don't resist them and we don't like lash out, if we feel them, they process. And it was dissipating in 60 to 90 seconds. And then we can be curious. It's like, what was that feeling? Like sometimes I can't, don't have a word for the feeling. And so learning the language of like, what was that feeling? Was that loneliness? Was that like, what does shame feel like? What does sadness feel like? What does disappointment feel like? All of those, because none of those are bad emotions. Those are helpful information. And learning to feel and be curious about them helps us understand ourselves and the information that our bodies are giving us, so we can work together with our bodies and minds. And number 4, I always talk about the barf plan. And that's basically you barf out your thoughts, like write all your thoughts down, sort them out. And there's a series of questions like, is it true? What are the facts? What about this really bothers us? And then plan out the next steps. And that's key, because rather than just being up here, then we can actually process, plan. And sometimes the plan involves just not doing anything. But it really helps us to be conscious. So you can go to my website at livebrighter.info and look for the free barf plan, and it'll have like, okay, this is what we do, barf out your thoughts, this is how we sort them, this is how you plan them. And using that tool daily, 10 minutes a day, can really change your life. It's changed my life, and it can change yours. So the big thing to know is we are not alone. We've all gone through things, and we can get help. We can sort through this. We can have counselors. If you do choose a counselor, make sure they're trauma informed and EMDR if it's something about a trauma. And you can do a lot of processing on your own, which is fabulous. And if you feel like, oh, what I'm feeling isn't a big deal, but you find that you're feeling it regularly, it's a big deal. So don't tell yourself that. You are valuable. We're supposed to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I say love universe or God, however you want to say it, source. And then we're supposed to love others as we love ourselves. And that starts by loving ourselves. And to love ourselves, we have to prioritize what's really going on beneath the surface. So if you are interested in counseling, if you listen to episode with me, Live Brighter with Tara, episode 60 and 61, that's with Dawn Dominguez, Windows of Hope, and she has counseling on a sliding scale. I always tell my kids, like, counseling is so valuable. I have a counselor, huge, and I always tell my kids, first 5 counseling sessions on me. It's just so, so important. Also, if you look at episodes 56 and 57 with Susan Williams with Finding Freedom, she has free mental health support, and that's in the community environment, and she can do that via Zoom. It's fabulous. I've been part of their organization. I think it's helpful. BetterHelp.com is online counseling. Also, the whole reason why I wrote the Unravel Notebook, available on Amazon, is to unravel our thoughts so we can just live healthier and brighter. And so that is an option too. So lots of options. But the biggest thing is just to be brave and choose you. I believe in you. Make it a great day. I hope you've been loving my podcast and growing 1% at a time in our community. And if you've noticed that you want to get somewhere quicker, faster, or you need some personalized attention, then reach out to me, because I do life coaching that involves both the conscious and the subconscious. And that is a way to get somewhere faster, to have personalized care. So reach out to me, sign up for a 15-minute free consultation to see if it's right for you, and we'll see if we can set something up. Make it a great day. Growing into adulthood. It's funny, we get to become adults like after 18, and somehow we think we should have all of everything we need to be an adult. But being an adult is a growing process and a learning process, and it takes time and it takes a few other things. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is growing into adulthood. And the reason why I wanted to do this podcast is because my kids just moved out. So I'm now an empty nester. And also, what else inspired me is I was recently in Colombia, South America, and there's so many beautiful plants, and each plant is so different. And that's how I feel like each of my children are, and each of us are. It's like we're different plants and we're beautiful in our own way, but it takes a bit for us to grow the best way we can. And some of those things that we need are some soil, obviously the seed. In order to grow, we need some water, sunshine, and some time. So we're going to use that analogy and talk about adulting and adulthood. First, we're going to talk about soil. And I feel like the soil is kind of the dirt, the crap, kind of like our childhoods and our surroundings. And it's really interesting just to look at that. So unfortunately, I trained my children to be overly kind and giving and somewhat perfectionistics. It was a religious household, which was not helpful in a lot of ways. And now we're divorced parents, and we have 2 different lifestyles and philosophies. Where I still love God and Jesus, I definitely look at things very differently. And I'm definitely not a perfectionist and all of those things anymore, or a goodist. So we all have our childhood, our dirt, and it's so good to kind of know our dirt and figure out which are going to be nutrients that are actually going to help us and which is the crap that doesn't serve us. And it's interesting that different seeds, like different individuals, will be affected differently by the same soil. And so, you can talk to each of my children, except 4 of them, and ask them, like, what did they think of their childhood? What did they get that was helpful? What wasn't helpful? And you'd think they were talking about 4 different families, but it's just different seeds affected by different dirt. And I think it's so important to be curious about our dirt, where we were raised, how we grew up, and what we want to get from our childhood, what's actually going to serve us, and really reform the stories so that we're not in a victim. Because I really do believe that everything God gives us, we can be used for good if we love Him. And that's a promise He's given us. So even all that, whatever crap, we can transform the story so we are like victors and learners from those things that we didn't always choose. Another thing is, nowadays, now that we're in the dirt, it's important that we adjust our dirt. We add nutrients that work best for us. We choose people and surroundings that are best for us, and we're each individual plants. And so I can't say, hey, this surrounding is best for you, or this surrounding is best for my kids, because it's their own choice, and we are our own people, and it will be affected differently. Again, it's just so important that we own our lives, and that allows us to own our future. And we really have to start with ownership. And then just adding, expect some more dirt. I mean, unfortunately, we get dirt in our life. And so failing forward is so important to just know that it is part of life to have challenges and to fail forward and learn from it and let it be like what creates our dreams and our visions and our passions. Is sometimes it's the dirt, which is very interesting to me. So that's our dirt, the soil. Next is the seed. And guess what? We're the seed. We're our own unique, beautiful seed, one of a kind seed. And sometimes we don't know how we're going to bloom and blossom or what type of plant we are until we're giving it the nutrients, the soil, the sunshine, the water, and everything, and see what happens. And it's so fun to kind of look at ourselves with curiosity and love and just be curious to see who are we and what really lights us up and what really doesn't, what are we passionate about and what really upsets us, and really enjoy the way that we are unique and designed, and really learn to love ourselves and just embrace that. And I think it's just so important to embrace all the parts of us thus far. All the parts of us were doing the best that they could with what they knew, and really just to give grace and compassionate to all of those seasons in our lives. And really, honestly, if we don't shut those parts out, they have something to always teach us, and learn. We can learn. It's just way better if we embrace all of our what we would consider the cringy parts or something like that. Embrace that. And then, as a seed or as our own people, there's a couple things that are so important. I talk a lot to my kids, since I've been divorced, it's been completely different retraining, as much as I can. Cause when I got divorced, my youngest was 8. And so, there's only so much training you can do. And the most is living by example. But I really talk about the importance of feeling our feelings and knowing the language of our bodies, because I feel like in our society, we're so head focused, but our body, our subconscious has all this information, and really to be learning to listen to that, be learning to willing to listen to what it's signaling to us in our bodies, and really be connected. I always tell my kids first 5 counseling sessions on me. And it's true. I just feel like with feelings, you don't have to stuff them or ignore them or judge them or react to them. It's very easy growing up in a quote unquote Christian household to be like, oh, I shouldn't be angry. I shouldn't be lustful. I shouldn't be, rather than being like, hey, I'm a human and I'm feeling these feelings and this is what I'm feeling. And just to be okay with being curious about our feelings, and to allow them. And then it's so good because our feelings give us information. And so, if we follow the seeds to our feelings, then we can figure out the thoughts that are creating those feelings, or we can figure out about ourselves. And so it's so important to be curious and listening to the seeds of our feelings to figure out who we are and listen to our thinking that's affecting it. So super important. And also, a lot of us it's very easy to want to buffer when we're feeling uncomfortable feelings. And buffering is where the seeds of addiction can come in, or the weeds near our plant, where they, promise like some soothing, but they eventually take our life force. They eventually take from us what we need. And those are the weeds and buffering. And there's lots of things we buffer with, but in the end, they all soothe, but they all deplete us in the end. And a really good test to be like, hey, am I processing my feelings? Is for us to just be still, be quiet, and see, are we at peace? Have we like processed that emotional cup of feelings, or is it very unsettling? I know when I was their age, it was very hard for me to just be quiet and still. Because I didn't process my feelings. I didn't even have the I didn't have the tools for that. So it's really important to like learn the tool of feeling our feelings in our body and exploring them and being like, oh, that's what shame feels like, and this is where it's feeling. And those feelings, once we process them and allow them, will dissipate. So it's really amazing. And then along with that, feeling our feelings is thinking, or basically we have our thinking, but we need to understand like that our thoughts aren't us. We get to choose our thoughts. And we don't have to believe everything we think. We can, I mean, honestly, we all think some of the stupidest, craziest shit. And it just is part of like our human experiences. We get weird thoughts from all sorts of different places. But what we choose to believe about ourselves and what we choose to believe about those thoughts, that's what becomes true. That's what we start to live. So whatever we're thinking on is what we end up living. And that's why I like my favorite verse. And the Bible talks about think about whatever is true, noble, honorable, trustworthy, because those are the things that grow us. And it's not to deny anything that's not going well or anything honest thinking, but it really does know that we can listen to our thinking and choose our thinking and really figure out if our thinking is congruent with us and if our thinking is serving us and helping us. So that's the seed. We're all the seed, and being able to feel our feelings and think our thinking is how to help us as a seed. And then third is some water. We all, a plant needs water. And what I think of as water is love and respect and care for ourselves. And that is so necessary for our growth. And I mean, I feel like that's exactly what God says. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So it really does start by loving ourselves. And what that looks like practically, what I'd want to tell my kids is you got to appreciate yourself, because out of appreciating yourself, you can appreciate others more. And appreciating yourself and not comparing, talking to ourselves with kindness, talking to ourselves like we would talk as a friend. And I just had to like cut off any talk that I would not talk to as a friend and just say, yeah, I'm not going to talk to myself that way. That's not okay. And learning to advocate for ourselves. Holy cow, that is a learned thing. And I would definitely say when the kids were young, I did not train them to do that. And then showing up for ourselves and keeping our own promises. Like it's easy to show up for others, or typically easier, but really giving that same respect to ourselves and doing what we want to do and showing up like we want to for ourselves is super important. Part of advocating is having boundaries. And again, that's a skill. Like we have to learn to be nice, but we also have to learn to be firm. We have to know how to be loving, and we have to know how to have boundaries. We have to understand our wants, needs, and desires and be able to speak them clearly. I can't tell you how hard it was to speak my wants, needs, and desires clearly and deal breakers. I still struggle with that. It's like, okay, is this the clearest way I can be speaking? Because wow, I have got all sorts of things, in my own past about not speaking clearly and the problem with that. So if we want to be, we need lots of water in order to grow. And that is that love and that respect for ourselves. But I think about like, having boundaries is again a skill, and being able to say things like, hey, I would really like that, or I prefer that. I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't work for me. I hear what you're saying, but I see things differently. And then, or I see what you're saying and I'm on a different page, or I don't want that. And then to be firm with people. And I think my kids right now would find this very difficult to just say, no, stop, don't do that. You need to just stop. And I think they would call that being a Karen. But there's a place and time. It is super important to have that skill to know how to be firm when needed. And it seems to be a rare time, but that skill has to be there. And it's super important. Then the fourth thing we need is sunshine. And I really feel like that's just, you know, our soul loving God and God loving us. And it's really basking in the sunshine of, and whether you call God source or universe, but just it's a very loving, appreciative, warm light, and letting that infuse ourselves, having that personal relationship with that light where we're conversing and enjoying each other. This is one thing that's kind of interesting, having my kids in a religious background or household, is two of them, they really thought, loving God was about rules and regulations, which makes me, obviously grieves me, because honestly, that's kind of just the opposite. That is what I would call religion. Whereas God really, when you look at the personhood of Jesus and, Jesus being God, it's really about relationship. It's all about relationship. And you can't perform yourself into a relationship. We can never be good enough. It's more about experiencing it, being honest, in how we're feeling, and having that honesty between God and ourselves, and really just having a relationship that nurtures us, that feeds our soul. And we need that sunshine for our souls. And so just cultivating that relationship and experiencing it. And, God and soul source, he works in miraculous, amazing ways today. And just experiencing how he really sees us as his individual little kids that are about 3 to 5, and he just delights in us, and really basking in that, and appreciating and loving him. So sunshine, lots of sunshine. So, and the last thing we all need is a little time. So I really say, like, enjoy today and live for future you. Like, that's how I balance, like, is what I'm doing today, that I'm enjoying, is that what I really want? And it's good for me today, and it's even better for my future me. And so kind of balancing that, because if we enjoy too much today, we make tomorrow harder. But we focus too much on the future, then we can't enjoy the present. And so just allowing the time. So those are some things we need as we're growing in our adulthood journey. And I feel like it applies to all of us. It's always a good check-in. It's like, okay, how's my sunshine? How am I feeling a little depleted? Do I need to be connecting with God more and getting a little bit more sunshine? Or am I allowing weeds into my life that are promising me some soothing, but are depleting my energy, and where I'm at? So it's a good thing to be thinking about. So think back now for yourselves. It's like, when you think about, like, do you need some more water, like love, respect, and kindness for yourself? Is it more sunshine? Is it more just appreciating the seed of who you are? Is it like the soil around you? And so just choose one thing And the cool things is we can actually change our so we can change things for ourselves. And that is how we grow, is being in tune with ourselves as far as what we need. And it's very different for everyone. That's why I can't tell my kids, like, you need to do that, because in the end, they need to check in with themselves and be like what they need. And I say that for all of us, is we really need to check what we need. And so just take a pause. I'm going to just take a deep breath and check in with yourself. One thing that would improve your adulthood journey, because it is a journey. So make it a great day. Shine brighter every day, 1% at a time. Take care.